Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be a chip strategy special, and the reason why we're talking about chip strategy now is because this is around the time of the year where you really want to start making sure that your transfers are planned around a certain chip strategy. And the reason why chip strategy is important is because it allows you to navigate this really tricky FPL landscape, what I would say, in the best way possible. Unfortunately, of course, a lot of this understanding is based on information that is not fully grabbed right now. So what I would say is that it's first of all important to understand Game Week 29, which is a blank game week, and then Game Week 34, which is a blank/double game week, and then Game Week 37, which is going to be a double game week. The reason why we need to know this is because ultimately Game Week 29 and the impacts of Game Week 29 will have basically negative and sort of negative correlative impacts to Game Week 34. And of course, it will also have impacts on Game Week 37, and I'll explain that in a moment. So as I said, right now we have the ability to, let's say, use our wildcards, the second wildcard for the season, which in FPL, of course, you're allowed to use after Game Week 20. We also have most likely a free hit that you've kept, and we also have a triple captaincy, as well as, of course, a bench boost. I think the most important thing to talk about, first of all, is the fixtures. So 29, 34, and 37. Then I can actually go into specifically each chip and how we can actually plan to play it. And then I can talk about the four mainline strategies that I actually have in mind that I think are going to be helpful for FPL managers right now that aren't too niche. So for Game Week 29, I think the best understanding of Game Week 29 is to understand that it's actually completely related to FA Cup results. Right now, we just have had the 4th round of the FA Cup culminated. The next set of fixtures is going to be the 5th round of the FA Cup. And depending on who actually wins those fixtures in the FA Cup, that will let us know who actually advances into the quarterfinals of the FA Cup. And of course, a lot of the Premier League teams are involved in the FA Cup and will probably also progress to the quarterfinals. And unfortunately, of course, by progressing into the quarterfinals, these teams will create a blank game week for them and their opponents on Game Week 29. So right now, if you go on the FPL website and you look at the fixtures for Game Week 29, there's only 3 fixtures that we actually know are fully confirmed to be played. There's a chance, and there's a very real chance that, unfortunately, 7 of the remaining fixtures will be unplayable. But that's a very, very minuscule chance. Our understanding of the fixtures right now is best understood by this graphic here that's been created by Ben Crullen in partnership with Fantasy Football Hub. And the most important thing is to really note that a lot of this is based on whether, of course, the Premier League teams will continue to progress in the FA Cup. So as you can see on the right-hand side of the column there, you can see that there's a blank if, for example, Brighton versus Man City, the Game Week 29 fixture will become a blank if Brighton beat Wolves in the FA Cup or if Man City beat Luton in the FA Cup. Now, because these 2 results are actually independent, the issue is that means that Brighton have to lose to Wolves and Man City have to lose to Luton for this fixture to actually happen. And that's so unlikely because we know that both Brighton and Man City are going to be the sort of overdogs in that fixture. Then we also have some other FA Cup results like Liverpool versus Southampton, Wolves versus Brighton that I've already mentioned already, Bournemouth versus Leicester, Chelsea versus Leeds, Newcastle versus Blackburn, Man United versus Nottingham Forest, and of course, as I mentioned already, Luton versus Man City. And these will have impacts on the individual fixtures that we can see, which is Brighton versus Man City, Everton versus Liverpool, Wolves versus Bournemouth, Arsenal versus Chelsea, Crystal Palace versus Newcastle, so on and so on. The biggest issue, of course, with all our FPL teams is that we are now invested into Triple City. So that's going to be an issue. We're also invested into likely maybe 2 or 3 Liverpool, and that's going to be an issue as well. Not only for Game Week 29, but also Game Week 26, where we're probably going to sell these Liverpool players on Game Week 26. On top of that, we have Wolves versus Bournemouth, and this is an issue because a lot of us will be investing into Bournemouth right before Game Week 29. The reason why is because we know that there's going to be a double game week between Bournemouth versus Luton in Game Week 28. So by investing into Luton players or Bournemouth players, you're actually sort of making your team worse for Game Week 29, which means that it's very hard to actually navigate both landscapes, in my opinion, effectively. On top of that, too, we also own a lot of Arsenal players and Cole Palmer, or Cole Palmer plus another Chelsea defender. So very likely that game will also be a blank, too. Crystal Palace versus Newcastle, probably a team or a fixture that doesn't matter too much, but right now still a lot of people do own Gordon and Trippier. With Man United versus Sheffield United and Luton versus Nottingham Forest, probably not too much ownership there outside of maybe Man United, Archer, and also maybe a Luton player like Doughty or Kaminsky. So as you can see, of course, it's very hard to actually navigate Game Week 29, and we expect that the amount of projected blank fixtures is 5.27. Now, this, of course, is going to be a real number. It's going to be 4, 5, or 6, or 7, but we will understand this on Game Week 27. The reason why is because these matches in the FA Cup on the right-hand side will actually be culminated by the Game Week 27 deadline. So by Game Week 27, we should already have a deep understanding of the fixtures and where they fall. So that's why a lot of people have been recommending wildcarding on 27, because in theory, let's say if your FPL team is very bad right now, you can have perfect information for Game Week 29, and you can have a good guess as to Game Weeks 34 and 37. I'll talk about that in a moment, but that's why Wildcard 27 has been highlighted, if some people have been wondering as well. And I'll talk about Wildcard 27 much later on in the video. But this is our understanding of Game Week 29, and the understanding will be fully sort of crystallized in Game Week 27. So that's why it's worth noting that we have percentages here and probabilities, but they will change into basically binary 100% or 0% later on in the future. The next graphic that I'd like to show is actually the predicted fixtures for Game Week 29, 34, and 37. And this kind of shows you the relationship between Game Week 29, 34, and 37. Now, what's interesting, of course, is if you think about all the fixtures for Game Week 29 that will become blank Game Week fixtures on Game Week 29, those fixtures will have to be replayed at a later date, and they will have to be played between Game Weeks 34 and 37. So the reason why you can see that there's fixture probabilities here for Game Week 34 and 37, and they seem to be in the opposite direction of Game Week 29, is exactly like so. So let's look at a team like Arsenal, for example. Arsenal actually have a 0.2% chance, really, of having a fixture on Game Week 29. On the other hand, that actually allows them to have probably a double game week somewhere between Game Weeks 34 and 37. So this is because if Chelsea actually beat Leeds within the FA Cup, Arsenal versus Chelsea will become a blank, and it will have to be rescheduled at a later date. As you can see, of course, this is why this graphic is quite interesting. For example, a team like Aston Villa that are confirmed to play in Game Week 29, or a team like Fulham that are confirmed to play in Game Week 29, or a team like Tottenham that are also confirmed to play in Game Week 29, are very likely to also have a blank game week in Game Week 34. So you can see that there's sort of like an opposite relationship between a lot of this, even though there's a team like Brentford that could play 29, 34, 37, or a team like Burnley that could also play 29, 34, and 37. The reason why I say this is because you probably want to be investing into a team that either blanks in Game Week 29 or plays in Game Week 29. The reason why is because whatever chip strategy you have now in place, let's say planning around planning a free hit around Game Week 29 or 34 is probably the most ideal. I don't think 37 is very logical. I'll talk about that in a moment. But for me, because you can see an almost opposite relationship between Game Week 29 and 34, it just makes sense to actually smooth out your planning by making sure that you ignore one of these key game weeks with a lot of blank fixtures. One of the pros, of course, of Game Week 29 is that, in theory, you get to continue to invest into some of the top teams that will blank. For example, Arsenal, Liverpool, Man City are good examples of that, and Cole Palmer as well. I'll just add him as an asset, even though I don't think Chelsea are a top team. So that's, for example, a good understanding. Newcastle as well, technically, even though the defense has been horrible recently. Brighton as well, probably included within this. On the other hand, on Game Week 34, you can probably also, if you free hit on Game Week 34, you can instead invest into teams that will play on Game Week 29. So you can maybe instead invest into Aston Villa, Brentford with Tony, Fulham potentially maybe with one player like Leno, Tottenham, for example, with Son, Richarlison, even Madison, for example, Pedro Porro, Udogi, and West Ham, of course, a team where you can maybe invest into a midfielder potentially of choice. The issue, of course, as I said, is that if you don't have a free hit, it's very hard to navigate either of those game weeks. So if you, let's say, plan to free hit on 37, or you free hit already, you can see it's very tricky to sort of swap your team around so that it fits Game Week 29 and then immediately have it fit for Game Week 34. With Game Week 37, I think a lot of people are eyeing that up as an opportunity to bench boost. And the reason why we say that is because ultimately you don't have blanks. It's very likely that you can create a very flexible team here and sort of build towards a bench boost. Even if you, for example, take hits to create a bench boost, it's fine because you know that it's sort of a dead end anyways, because Game Week 38 is the only fixture left on the calendar and your team's probably still going to be set up for Game Week 38 no matter what. Plus you'll have a well-rounded bench, I guess, to deal with the inevitable sort of last fixture of the season rotation. So that's basically our understanding of Game Week 29, 34, and 37. As I said, our understanding of Game Week 29 will crystallize on Game Week 27. Our understanding of Game Week 34 will crystallize around Game Weeks 30 and 31, as well as our understanding of Game Week 37. So by around Game Week 31, we probably will get a full understanding of, let's say, where fixtures are going. Either they go to Game Week 34 or they go to Game Week 37. And that's based on, for example, TV scheduling and a multitude of other things. And of course, the most important thing, as I said, is probably keep your notifications on for Ben Crullen and follow as much fixture-related news as possible from him, because we'll get as much of an understanding really from him as you could anywhere else. So that's basically our understanding of Game Weeks 29, 34, and 37 covered. And now let's talk about the chips that we actually have in play and what we can actually do with them. The first thing to talk about is the wild card. I think the wild card is the strongest chip in FPL. And you have to understand that the second wildcard can only be used basically Game Weeks 20 and beyond. So if you've already used a wildcard, you can't use it again in this second half of the season. However, if you still have the second wildcard to play, which you probably do, and probably why you're watching this video, then this is worth sort of listening to. So Wildcard 27 is one of the first options to Wildcard in terms of Wildcard windows. And the reason why I think Wildcard 27 makes sense to players, as I said, is because you'll get a good understanding of Game Week 29 and the landscape there, and you can make some judgments about, Game Weeks 34 and 37 as a result of that too. So you get a better understanding, of course, from what we have now, as it stands in Game Week 25. However, I think the issue with, let's say, wildcarding on 27 is that you probably still will miss a little bit of information. Some of the information will actually come from sort of TV scheduling, sort of information that we'll get around Game Week 28/Game Week 29. On top of that, too, my concern with really Game Week 27 wildcard is that you're sort of setting yourself up more so for the Bournemouth versus Luton fixtures than anything, because naturally with wildcards, the way they work is that you'll be able to basically plan ahead, but also you're really just sort of making sure that your team is actually set up for the short term more so than the medium to long term, because of course someone who wildcards later will be able to react to future information, future injuries, and so on and so forth. So that's the slight concern. Maybe your understanding of Game Weeks 34 and 37 aren't the best, but you will be able to plan ahead of the curve for Game Week 28. My concern though is that it's only one double and it is one fixture, so that Bournemouth versus Luton fixture could be very important. And maybe, of course, because the Bournemouth double is so good, that could actually get you a lot of value versus the field. And when we think about, let's say, being slightly differential, you could get that Bournemouth ownership, that Luton ownership extremely high, and also navigate with Game Week 29, let's say, if you plan to free hit. So, for example, if, let's say, Bournemouth and Luton are teams that will blank on Game Week 29, then actually what you could do, of course, is free hit 29 on purpose, invest heavily into Bournemouth Luton, potentially even bench boost on Game Week 28, and then set yourself up in the future in a very differential path. So I think that's interesting. You could, of course, just simply bench boost on 37, but I think this would only make sense for a manager who, first of all, thinks that their team is very weak for Game Week 27 and beyond, but also actually would like to invest into, for example, Game Week 37 bench boost because they think that Game Week 28 bench boost will not provide you with a lot of dividends. And it's very likely, in my opinion, that Game Week 28 bench boost is very weak because still you're investing into some weaker teams here and some weaker assets, and that's the reality of it. You'll also have to carry a slightly deeper and larger Bournemouth versus Luton bench, which might lead to you, for example, making worse decisions later down the line. So that's one thing to think about. The other thing to think about is going to be Wildcard 26. Wildcard 26 is an interesting one because I think this is for managers who deliberately struggle with Game Week 26, and this could be for a multitude of reasons. First of all, you might want to actually keep Palmer. You might want to keep your triple Spurs. You might want to actually keep your Liverpool players. You might also want to keep, for example, the opportunity to, or you might actually have been dealing with a lot of injuries lately, like let's say Eze and Konsa. So if you have players like that and you have maybe 6 to 7 blankers as of the sort of time of this recording of this video, you might actually struggle to sort of plan ahead for Game Week 26, and you might have to take a -4, a -8, or a -12. In my opinion, if you only need to take a -4, you probably don't need to be wildcarding on Game Week 26. But if your plans are actually to -8 or to -12, I really think it's a serious option to think about actually wildcarding on Game Week 26, because actually, a wildcard we can't necessarily say is going to give you an extra 30, 40, 50 points. But what it can do, of course, is protect you from taking extreme hits. And I think 8 to 12 is around that category. And the reason why I say that is because if you wildcard 26, it also allows you to actually dead end into Game Week 25, which will probably give you an additional 4 to 5 to 6 to 8 points because of your ability to actually go into even more Liverpool players or even more Spurs players who actually have a really good game week here, and you can dead end totally fine in Game Week 25. So that's one option here if you're wildcarding on Game Week 26. But I think, as I said, this is a very differential path. I would not necessarily recommend investing too heavily into Bournemouth versus Luton because unfortunately, you're sort of in that territory where in Wildcard 26, you're just gambling based on the information that you have. You don't know what exactly are the FA Cup blank game week fixtures. And if we go back to, for example, Ben Crow's graphic, you kind of have to, in my opinion, hedge between multiple teams and hope for one upset to happen. You can't necessarily, for example, go triple Arsenal, triple Chelsea and trust in some sort of crazy bet that Arsenal or rather Chelsea are going to lose to Leeds, because it's very likely that result's not going to culminate the way that you want. And instead, you probably want to have maybe one Newcastle player, one United player, one Nottingham Forest player potentially, one Wolves player potentially, as opposed to having multiple players from one team that could very likely blank on Game Week 29. So that's one thing to think about. Alternatively, of course, you can also wildcard 26 and free hit for Game Week 29, and then you can just simply try and react to 34 as best as possible, which would also probably make a little bit more sense because right now, I think it doesn't make sense to say that we have good enough information to sort of navigate the short-term landscape. And I think, if anything, I kind of like the idea of free hitting on 29, just so you can keep as many Arsenal players as possible, as many Chelsea players as possible. But I can understand you might also believe in the flip side of that argument. You could invest into more so Brentford, Tottenham, and Aston Villa players instead if you're confident in those teams. But given, for example, Buba Kamara's sort of ACL injury, maybe also our want to change around some of our Tottenham players and have a better understanding of Richarlison's minutes going forwards, it might be very hard to actually invest into those teams and those players. And maybe you don't want to be investing into West Ham right now because they do look like a terrible team, and so on and so forth. So that's one thing to think about right now, whether you're free at 29 or 34. In my opinion, whatever wildcard strategy you pick, it doesn't actually matter, what free hit is being used, because in my opinion, you just wildcard with the free hit in mind. So if you're planning for Game Week 29 free hit, you just wildcard with the team that plans around that. If you wildcard planning for Game Week 34 free hit, you just also wildcard around that. That's not really something that is dependent on the free hit window. The free hit window just changes what your draft is, but it doesn't change when you wildcard, in my opinion. In terms of, let's say, going back to wildcards, the next sort of most convenient window is Game Week 31 or 30/31. And this is, for example, taking the assumption that we would have, a clear understanding of the full picture of Game Week 34 and 37. And I think this is the very conventional window, because the idea behind wildcarding here is that, unfortunately, 29, 34, and 37 are very ugly game weeks, and they don't really match well with each other. So it actually makes sense to probably wildcard between those game weeks to actually be able to sort of navigate them perfectly. And of course, knowing that you'll also free hit, for example, on, let's say, Game Week 34, for example, you would have the ability to, let's say, plan ahead completely, without any reservations for, let's say, a bench boost on 37 potentially. That could be one way to sort of think about it. Alternative, of course, you could also do the opposite. So right now you can start to plan towards a free hit on 29, and then you wildcard on 30/31, and then you just plan for 34 and 37 as best as you possibly can, knowing that you'll also bench boost potentially on 37 most likely, because there's going to be some blank fixtures on 34. So that's an opportunity there with a wildcard 30/31. I also think that you can wildcard on Game Week 35, and the Game Week 35 wildcard is probably the most traditional wildcard into bench boost wildcard setup possible, because on Game Week 37, as I said, it's most likely going to be the best week to bench boost. And if you can save your wildcard for Game Week 35, this is the extremely patient approach in FPL. You could maybe, for whatever reason, you might have been able to navigate the extremely tricky landscape of 29, 34 already, and even, for example, 28, 26, 25. If you're able to do that somehow, and you've been able to plan all the way to 35, I guess you can create what effectively would be the perfect bench boost on Game Week 37, and have 2 free transfers to allow yourself to do so if you plan to wildcard on 35. This, for me, is still a little bit of an extravagant strategy. And once again, it really doesn't matter whether you're free on 29 or 34. All you need to do is plan, your transfers around it. But I think this is the most, this is the most logical structure. But I also think that it could also give you some downsides. Let's say the bench boost on 37 isn't all that you dreamed of, and actually you find that navigating your team around the early fixtures, like let's say between 29 and 34, is extremely tough. You would have wasted the opportunity to wildcard to navigate that landscape a little bit better. And so maybe you would lose a lot of value heading towards 35, and that patient approach might not work out. So in my opinion, the con is really sort of betting on Game Week 37 bench boost, which I think is not exactly the best, because I think we'll all plan to do a Game Week 37 bench boost. You might not have the strongest Game Week 37 bench boost, but I don't think the bench boost is the chip that we want to plan all our strategy around. But I think it still could be viable, just depending on if you're very lucky, for example, and the fixtures for blank Game Week 29 don't end up actually being that serious. There's a lot of FA Cup upsets, for example. You could actually turn out really, really good, and by then you could actually just decide to naturally do a wildcard 35. And I think this works for managers who right now still have very good teams in place, don't plan to wildcard, maybe are planning to wildcard flexibly around 30/31, but have no ideas or no plans in the short term to dead end their team. And I think that's totally fine. So these are wildcard windows. In terms of free hit, as I said, going back very quickly, I think it's just simply between Game Weeks 29 and 34. You could even free hit in the short term now. Let's say Game Week 26 is very bad for you. You might want to free hit there. But as I said, I think because 29 and 34 have an opposite relationship, it's very hard to actually plan your transfers around it. Unless, let's say, you plan to wildcard after 29, and you've already dead ended your team. So for example, that could be an opportunity opportunity as well. But I still think that free hit, it really is team dependent here if you plan to actually use it outside of 29-34. So that would be for very specific reasons for people who, for example, don't have a good Game Week 25 team. So let's say you've planned to go without Liverpool and Man City all this time. You already know you're on free at 25. So I don't need to speak more about that. You know you're on your own path, and that's totally cool because that's how FPL works. And then of course we have free at 26, as I said, which still doesn't make much sense to me because I think unless you really want to keep all these Liverpool players, all these Tottenham players, all these maybe Arsenal players as well, who don't exactly have the best matchup, or even a Newcastle player as well, and have some sort of way to manage Game Week 29, which seems impossible because unfortunately some of the blankers in Game Week 26 will blank again on Game Week 29. Then you could also free hit on 26. I think this is very particular, and this is specifically only if you've highly invested into Liverpool and Tottenham and plan to dead end to wildcard on Game Week 29. But I think that's very tough and very unfeasible. You could also wildcard on 28 as well. So the idea, of course, would be to dead end in the short term, but you'd also free hit as well. I just think it's not very feasible. The next chip, of course, is just the bench boost chip. I think personally, we will all be using it on Game Week 37. And when I say all, I think probably 85% of managers. The alternative, of course, as I said, is Game Week 28, or naturally just any random bench boost pair that you find. So for example, any period, let's say if you're carrying 15 players within your team, you find that you have actually 3 or 4 good players here, and you have maybe a double game week keeper, let's say Game Week 28, you could just bench boost anytime you want. In my opinion, I think bench boosting makes the most sense on Game Week 37, just because that's going to be a huge double game week. It's not going to be Game Week 34 where you have blanks, and you will probably know ahead of time, which double game week keepers to have, and who's worth a hit. And I think that's always going to be a good guarantee. I also think that we shouldn't be planning for bench boost 37, just because it's probably the chip in FPL that I think too many managers plan around, and it sometimes has sort of negative impacts on your team planning because you sort of neglect the short term. And then the last chip is going to be triple captaincy. So triple captaincy for me should really be put on Game Week 25, just because with Haaland here finally fit, fingers crossed. This video is actually being recorded before they play Copenhagen. I hope he doesn't get injured, and this doesn't look stupid. But I think triple captaincy on Haaland feels like a no-brainer, and it feels even better than last season, where I think right now the main comparison is double Game Week 28, where Solanke has 2 good fixtures himself, 2 home fixtures as well. But I still think that I would be betting on Haaland with 2 home fixtures. Chelsea right now still look like a pretty poor team when they play away. And on top of that, you also have Brentford, where they just demolished Brentford as well. And it's very likely that Haaland can do well once again at home. 2 fixtures in the Etihad. I think it is a bit of a no-brainer. But of course, you will also know that most of the field will do so. So if you're looking for a differential path, if you're looking to try win your mini leagues, and you think you don't have a chance right now reasonably by going for sort of a pure points maximization strategy, I guess you can go for a differential approach, and you could be looking at, let's say, a Solanke triple captaincy as well. Beyond that, I think it's very hard to plan necessarily to sort of triple captain on 34 and 37, just because I think that you might be implementing some chip strategies around that, specifically, for example, the bench boost on 37. But of course, if let's say on Game Week 34, you spot, for example, a double game week, let's say by Game Week 30, that you actually like a lot and you want to save it for then, and you know that something's predestined, in your mind, then go for example, let's say a triple captaincy on Game Week 34 as well. Those are, for example, the reasonable windows, but I think it's very tough to sort of navigate that. So to round off this video, I think I'm going to list out 4 or 5 strategies that I think are very much in the metagame. Keep in mind, of course, that free hitting on 29 and 34 is completely optional on all of them. I don't think there's a specific free hit that you need to pursue. I've seen pros and cons to free at 29 and 34. I can talk about them right now. 29, in my opinion, is as I said, you're one to, for example, to continue to invest into Arsenal players, Chelsea players, any of the blankers there. On 34, of course, it's just the flip side of that argument. You're sort of, you think that the ceiling of Game Week 29 free hit is extremely low. Therefore, you want to capitalize on what would technically be a high ceiling free hit on 34. So I think it's apples and oranges. Some people have a little bit more of a sort of floor raising approach, and some people have a ceiling raising approach. And it really depends on whether you believe in free at 39 and free at 34 has, more fruit and more merit right now. Right now, I think the information that we have is that it doesn't really matter. I think you just plan around it. So for me, it's wildcard 26, free hit 29/34, and also bench boost 37. Then I think it's wildcard 27, free hit 29/34, and then bench boost 28/bench boost 37. Then it's going to be wildcard 31/30, and also free hit 29/free hit 34. And then also, bench boost 37, or it's going to be wildcard 35, free hit 29/34, and bench boost 37. So those are sort of my sort of general chip strategies. I think right now, in my opinion, you can probably pursue the path that probably makes the most sense for your team by just simply looking at your team, how many players you have involved within a certain blank game week on paper, how many players you have involved in a certain double game week on paper. Choose, for example, to see in the short term, game week 25, the double there, the blank game week 26, and the double game week 28, whether you need a shorter term wild card to plan more effectively around it, or if you just plan on, for example, taking a more patient approach, therefore wild carding, later down the line. So those are my sort of thoughts on chip strategy. I hope this video helps. I hope it kind of helps you navigate the landscape a bit better. Ultimately, as I said, the cardinal rule is to sort of devise your own chip strategy based on your own team and to enjoy the merits of that process.